Thank you very much. Just with the first slide, I'm just going to tell you when I change so I can just get a feel for the delay, if any. If I could just ask you to just let me know when you see it from your side. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you for your time and your attendance and your interest. I'm sorry, I've got something which is running away with it here. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. There's another part which is the less formal part of it, and that is I like to introduce myself as a reformed engineer. And the reason I say that is whilst I studied, qualified, and then practiced as a civil engineer, and I loved it, I realized over time that whilst mechanics and science is very important, the most important thing in any business or any society is actually the people. And so I became an engineer who loves people, which not all engineers do. The second part of my introduction is another reformed aspect, and that is I'm a reformed CEO. I came from a style of leadership when CEOs were expected to have all of the answers, and I absolutely acknowledge that I don't have all of the answers. In fact, sometimes I don't even understand the questions anymore, but I find it a lot more fun and a lot more liberating to be in that mode than having to have the answers all the time. I apologize if it's running ahead for some reason. Whenever I press a screen change, it seems to move a couple, but I'll manage it as best I can. So I'm just changing to the next slide now. Which should be an example of missing alignment. Have you got that?
Yes.
Okay, super. So my challenge or my interest in this particular challenge was really prickled many years ago when I was working with a supply chain company, and the executive or the EXCO executive committee was a very experienced, very seasoned, and very, apologies for something going in the background, a very experienced, very seasoned, very committed, very well-educated bunch of people, and we were battling to come up with a new supply chain strategy. The company was repositioning itself from a more traditional third-party logistics provider and looking for a full supply chain management. And this strategy was going round and round and round and round, and we just could not pin it down. And suddenly the insight was that out of 12 of us around the table, we did not have a common alignment around what supply chain meant. And when we were all asked to write down what supply chain meant, there were 12 of us, we ended up with 13 or 14 definitions because some people had more than one. It was an absolute epiphany moment, and we then spent about an hour really fine-tuning what a common understanding of supply chain was, and the net result was that the supply chain strategy dropped out in about another 2 hours. And we had wasted untold hours and months of opportunity because we assumed something which was really very, very, very fundamental to the process, and we had a total lack of alignment at that level. And drawing back from my civil engineering days, where the power of the foundation is critical to hold up the structure, it really has made me increasingly fascinated in how do we get those basics right from a team perspective. Just giving you some context, I'm sure that, well, I hope most of you are familiar with the term VUCA. It's been around for a long time now. VUCA standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it is used to describe any scenario or set of circumstances in which things are moving, multiple moving parts, and with very unpredictable and rapidly changing potential scenarios. And this, as a breeding ground, has, in my opinion, made the command and control style of leadership, which was very necessary and very effective for many, many years, but it is putting it increasingly under pressure. And it's putting it under pressure because, in my opinion, teams and leaders are becoming increasingly stretched to try and remain effective and proactive. And the concept of having a single leader who is able to come up with all the answers and control at a macro level these various things is under extreme pressure. And that means, again, in my opinion, that we need to be looking at something different. Tapping into a fairly old model of teams, which is that for Patrick Lencioni. This has been around for many, many years, but I believe it is still valid. If we look at the pyramid on the left-hand side, you'll see the nature of the foundation, with starting from the bottom, trust, then conflict, then commitment, accountability, and results. And if we look at the table on the right-hand side, again, starting at the bottom, the problem at the lowest level is if trust is missing. And then the way to read this is, what does the leader, or what can the leader then do to resolve that problem? And it's really to demonstrate that vulnerability, to go first and say, I don't know, or I can't, or I'm unsure, whatever it may be. It is very simple to say, but it's not so easy for many leaders to do. And there may well be a kickback or a system requirement which is seeing that leader as having in total control and having all of the answers. It is a very, very difficult transition to make, and it's not one that is easy to do on your own without assistance, but it is incredibly liberating on the other side of it. We also have to bear in mind that there are many different styles of personality traits, whether we use MBTI or Enneagram, that's Myers-Briggs type index, or the Enneagram, or many, many others. And each one of those will have a different level of desire/ability to be able to go through with this transition. Once it's done, however, then others are attracted to that in the normal sense. Others are attracted to that process of sharing and becoming more collaborative and ultimately, hopefully, more co-creative. The fear of conflict, many other teams, the trust is there, but it's not there to the level which allows conflict to be readily discussed. And as a result, people pay lip service to it, and an effective leader will demand that proper debate is taken place, and that those differences, and my recommendation to teams and leaders, if they're battling with this conflict and conflict resolution, is to reframe the phrase. Rather than conflict resolution, use something like resolving differences, finding common ground through differences. Because the word conflict can just be in its own right a trigger, where when we say let's resolve this conflict, the two parties, or either of the two parties, immediately thinks that there's a fight coming, and that can be very counterproductive. Lack of commitment is relating to some individuals and teams are not keen to go down to that next level of detail. The obvious one being SMART, which stands for those SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. And they leave things fairly open and fairly fluid, which then allows people to not deliver and have somewhere to hide. So at some point of the process, fairly early on, need to bring in that greater level of robustness, in my opinion, again, all in my opinion, bring in that greater level of robustness in order to make sure that everybody is absolutely clear on what needs to be delivered, by whom, and by when, and what does success look like. Moving on to the next one, and these are cumulative, so you can't have the debate on conflict unless the trust is in place and so on. The avoidance of accountability is what happens when somebody misses this key deadline. What happens? Is it glossed over? Is it excused? Or is there a proper debate? And sometimes deadlines will be missed, and for possibly very good and valid reasons. But is there a genuine follow through? And is there a genuine attempt to move on from that? And then finally is the focusing on the team outcomes. And I often find when working with teams that whilst there's great focus on individual outcomes, what is overlooked is what is the team as a whole delivering. So it's not a question of the individual team members all delivering without looking at and saying, but is this combination actually delivering what is required from a team perspective? Moving on to the next slide. Again, I hope it doesn't run away with me. No, it's running away. Never had this before, my apologies. So on this one, a pattern of an underperforming team is if we look at the team leader being in the center, they will fire a question or a comment or make an observation or something to the person on the red arrow. That will come back to the team leader. The team leader will then fire something off towards the green, and it comes back in. And you end up, I only put the 2 up there, but you end up with a set of conversation which is effectively, or a team meeting, which is effectively a series of one-on-one meetings with a whole lot of spectators. And whilst they may have a place from time to time, I don't personally believe that there is that often a place, but there is a place for them from time to time. What you're not doing in terms of that is normally is harnessing the power of the team. And in order to do so, we need to introduce the rim of the wheel. And this is now hanging. The rim of the wheel, whereby and this built very quickly, but where the team leader is starting off, and the reds were the original inquiry. So the red starts off and goes off, and then it goes around pulling in various people's opinions. When the pause comes, the team leader asks something of the person who's been quiet to date, informed by the green. That sets another quick conversation going. And then in terms of the orange, to bring in that person, and really making sure that all members of the team are involved in the process and are committed. And we can draw this up many more. I've just done enough to give, hopefully to give an indication of the message that I'm trying to do. And what can be a very interesting technique is when you're sitting in a meeting, either as a team leader or as an observer, is to just draw the table, or if it's a virtual team, just draw a little map of the participants and see what is happening. And who is always, you get some people who are quick to respond, you get others who are always very quiet and delay their response. Both are valid, but sometimes different insights come by saying, those of you who normally answer very quickly, please give the others a chance. And those of you who normally sit quietly in the background observing, we would really like your opinion unfiltered by anybody else's observations. And often that's where innovation and new ideas come from. because I've sat in many, many meetings and I've coached many, many individuals and teams where they have got into a habit of communication. And it doesn't matter whether you're discussing the 100 million rand, $100 million capital proposal, or whether or not you should serve tea and coffee, or only one or the other at the next staff function. But it's the same players adopting the same kind of pattern. And in order to break that pattern, sometimes we've got to do something quite differently. So given those as combinations, and going back to the Lencioni diagram of building trust, a couple of things that will hopefully prove useful to you in terms of if you're wanting to start building or rebuilding trust or building it to a new level, a couple of techniques that will hopefully be of benefit to you. The first one is the Golden Circle by Simon Sinek. And for those of you who are interested, there's some very good YouTubes. I personally recommend the one which is around 7.5 minutes. There are 30-second ones. I don't believe they do them justice. And the 18-minute one, which is the full TED Talk, is very good, but you get the essence at around 7.5 minutes. And his basic point of departure is we work from the inside out with the Golden Circle. First establish and agree on the why. And only once the why is established and agreed to a sufficient extent, do you look at the how you're going to do some things, and then ultimately you move to the what. In many, many organizations and many, many people, they're actually very focused on the what, but they have little or no idea as to why. And I was working with a multidisciplinary team in a manufacturing industry recently, and it was quite horrifying. There was an individual who had been there for 32 years, middle management individual, 32 years, who had no idea as to what role either his role or his job or his department's job played in the bigger picture. He had no clue as to what was happening. Now, we can blame the individual for lacking curiosity, and it may be valid, but somewhere along the line, that team had never spent any effort or time communicating to the broader business community as to why they existed. And when I'm working with teams, I often find when I ask them, why do you exist as a team, they actually can't tell me. It's for historic reasons, or it's just the way it is, and they don't have a clear sense of purpose. So a very important step in creating a team that is becoming more effective is really understand the why, and a joint understanding of the why, because without that, you allow multiple agendas to come in, which ultimately waste time. You have 12 different versions of supply chain now disturbing the process of efficiency in terms of your delivery. Just to put up there, so clarifying the purpose for which the team, and is really what can the team only achieve by working together. If an individual or a couple of the individuals can achieve that result on their own, it's not really the team's purpose, because the team needs a contribution, not necessarily an equal contribution, but it does need a contribution from all of the team players. Moving on to the how, one of the very basic points of departure is business in general, society in general, and teams specifically are very interrelated with the topics of conversation. Conversations are really what hold your team together and or can pull it apart. Effective conversations make a huge difference. And the basic building block is the levels of listening. This is based on the work of Otto Scharmer, Theory U, and the bottom level of listening is the blah blah mode. And in this mode, you've got people who are talking, and you've got others who are busy with their cell phones or their tablets or their laptops, or are looking as though they're attentive, but they're actually planning the next project of their own or whatever it is. So although they're present in body, they are really disengaged from the process. The next level up is level 2 listening, is listening to confirm your own viewpoint and or to attack the other's viewpoint. And this is where you're coming from an agenda or coming from a position that you are trying to get through. Again, both of these are valid. I've been on a long distance hike where somebody ran out of new stories long before they ran out of the desire to tell stories. So they just started telling the same story time after time again. And if I hadn't disengaged, I think it would have been dangerous to both of our health. Okay. The positional viewpoint is absolutely, sometimes as a team leader, there are certain things that have to be done. And you just need to stay with those. But both of those are, to a certain extent, if we look at the left-hand side, the downward-facing arrow, exclusive, because they are ignoring the other person or the other people's agenda. Moving to level 3 is listening to learn and understand. Doesn't mean to say you have to agree with the agenda or the position of the other person, but by displaying curiosity and allowing them to get that feeling that what they have is actually important enough for you to learn about it, you are creating an inclusivity. And the inclusivity from at a basic level, neuroscience is showing us that we have quite a fundamentally different thinking process when we are feeling included as to when we're feeling excluded. And then level 4 is listening with empathy. This is really tapping into the feelings of the person and really listening to create a connection, an empathetic connection to the other person. And you'll see on the right-hand side, the Chinese symbol, which is alleged to mean to listen, and that brings in the ears, it brings in the eyes, it brings in the heart, and it brings in undivided attention. And I have found personally, I acknowledge to be an appallingly bad listener in the past. I found this a very useful thing to put up on the wall in my office and in the boardroom where I could see it, just to remind me that to try and listen at that level 4 listening. And we can say, well, you know, why is this important? And, you know, everybody listens. It's amazing to me how few people really do listen, and especially where we are dealing with teams that are sometimes international. A lot of people may be speaking in second, if not third language. We're coming from a multicultural background where assumptions are made left, right, and center, and never tested. And in actual fact, we just don't create that connection, with the result that for a lot of people, they are operating, sorry, this thing is really becoming irritating. They're really operating in an instinctive response to danger and exclusion, which using the animal kingdom is the fight mode or the flight mode or the freeze mode, or one which is becoming increasingly popular, especially within corporate, is to appease. In other words, to just agree with it without that full level of commitment. Moving on to the next level of how to become more effective, if we have got an increased level of listening. Oh, sorry, one other thing I meant to say about the levels of listening. And the power of that tool, in the feedback that I've received from a lot of the people with whom I work, is that by giving some kind of labels and categorization, which is commonly understood by the team, it then can be a very direct way, but not necessarily harsh way, to say, I'm really interested to hear what level of listening you think you're in, or I'm feeling that you're in level 1 or level 2 listening. How can I help you to get to level 3 or level 4? So by giving it a label, it seems to be able to fast forward people and move them to another level of listening. Underlying assumptions, not dissimilar to the supply chain. I was working with a group of 12 execs, and they wanted to come up with a way of working which included honesty. And having put honesty on the table and everybody agreed honesty was a great thing, I then said to them, okay, great, we have honesty. What does it mean by my honesty? And it became very quickly apparent that there were three major themes of honesty in the room. The first one was do not lie. Absolutely, honesty is not lying. Second one was tell the truth, which is different, not necessarily totally different. And then the third one was tell the whole truth, which is again different. And we ended up having a fascinating 45-minute odd debate around what did honesty mean. And at the end, that group agreed that honesty for them meant was to tell the whole truth, but always with the intent to do no harm to others, which then allowed everybody to come in under a common umbrella that brought in all of those others. And from then on, when one member of that exco asked any others or asked the group, are we being honest? They knew, everybody knew, that it was to tell the whole truth, but in a way that the intent was always to do no harm. This was just an example. There were many others, but what they did was they ran ahead, far, far, far ahead of what they had as a result of spending a couple of hours on just getting down to those underlying assumptions. Rules of engagement, and I just put up an example here. This is an example of a particular group that I worked with a good few years ago who were really battling with their communication. It was a new team, and they asked me to co-facilitate or facilitate a session, and they wanted to come up with a different way of working around communication. And these are the words that they chose, and they wanted no more than 10, and we put the little pictures with it. And what they did with these was they then, once we'd established them, they printed them out, they put them in all of their meeting rooms, they put them in all of their boardrooms, they all had it in their offices, and they all had a copy in their notebook. And the power of having an artifact or artifacts allowed them to depersonalize it when they were having a problem with each other or an individual. So if you look at the one bottom right, just to the right of the elephants, it's the mother and child, and it says communication will be relaxed, factual, and relevant to the situation on hand. That was specifically brought in because one of the individuals, whenever the pressure was on that group, they would start to tell jokes, very funny jokes. Everybody would laugh, but it would always break the momentum of the conversation. And just by being able to point to that thing, which is around about 5 o'clock, and say to him, how is this relevant to the situation on hand? They found a way to be able to keep on track. He still told the odd joke, but it was more appropriate and it was fun, and it allowed them to become far more effective and not to become diverted. And by having a written artifact on the wall, it moved from challenging each other to being able to point at the artifact on the wall and say, please, in terms of acknowledging elephants publicly, just using the other example just to the left of it, what is the elephant we're not advising or acknowledging publicly? So it moved it, as I say, out into a very practical way to be able to call people in a way that was respectful and progressive in moving forward. And then the one which is at, at 9 o'clock, we're open to and respect challenge, and no challenges need closure. So this was really a way of dealing with the differences where everybody committed to the fact that they wanted to be challenged and that those challenges needed to be brought to a closure. And they found ways of using this to then support each other in finding those closures. The topics that benefit from the collective input, and we'll come to that on the next slide. And my real message here is one of the power of slowing down and building a good foundation, getting those assumptions out into the open, making sure that everybody's on the same of the same understanding, and that then allows you to speed up and go so much quicker and so much further down the track. Using the 5 disciplines of high performance teams developed by Prof. Peter Hawkins, this is a very good model if you want to go a little bit more advanced. If you want to look at, again, it's there's a whole book written on this. I'm not really doing it justice in a couple of minutes, but the commissioning stage is really understanding how does this team fit in within the wider business strategy and the purpose in terms of clarifying the mission. What is the core purpose of that mission, and how does it, what is the vision from the team members, their success, what values are they going to do? This is where those rules of engagement can come in, the goals and objectives, and the roles and expectations of each other's protocols and ways of working, co-creating, really now holding that team accountable. What are the stakeholders, bottom right quadrant? What is the communication strategy for each of those? And if we look at that, we got the why. Sorry, it's running away with me. We've got the why, we've got the what, we've got the how, we've got the who, and then the 5th discipline in the middle is continuous improvement. What I found fascinating when I was first exposed to this is the research, and it's global research, showed that only of the order of 5% of teams globally that were included in the survey, and it was a couple of thousand as I recall, ever spend time on the 5th discipline in the middle, the core learning how to operate better as a team, how to support each other in the team, and how to support and develop ourselves as individuals. And that the percentage of high performance teams who adopted this approach and specifically went for that core learning was significantly higher than those who didn't. All of these are interdependent. They are all iterative. So whilst I started the build, and I apologize for the build running away with me, but in terms of that, you do start in the top right-hand quadrant and then work around. However, I have worked with teams where we had to develop a set of rules of engagement in order to change the patterns of behavior before we were able to go to the top right quadrant and establish a good solid why answer to the why question. In summary, the importance of clarifying why you exist as the team. I've just spent time on that. Spend time building the foundations, and it's key to get that trust into the room, real trust, not espoused trust, and not people just saying I trust each other, but people who are there to trust there. And it's also key to how to handle differences of opinion. Differences of opinion in a VUCA world, again, in my opinion, are absolutely desirable. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, necessary, because we all have a different view of the world, and it's only by putting all of those views together and then co-creating something which elevates beyond any individual's view that we can actually start to get ahead of the curve. And then a continuous review of effectiveness. What's working, what's not, what do we need to do more of, what do we not need to do less of? Is anything we should be stopping, anything we should be starting? There are multiple tools in terms of that. But if we just start off with that trust and how to handle differences around a common purpose, I believe that you will have a significant head start in becoming a lot more effective and in less time. And now I would like to open the floor to any questions and or comments.
Well, thank you very much, Pete, for a very interesting presentation. And folks, we are now open for question and answers. If you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console. Please click on it if you would like to speak directly with Mr. Pete. So let me go to the question box. A couple of them posted already. Could you expand a bit on the impact inclusion / exclusion, please?
Sure. So the research is basically showing that as a species, human species, we are all fundamentally hardwired for survival. No big secrets there. I mean, those of our ancestors who survived contributed to our gene makeup, and over time, those who didn't survive basically no longer contributed. So we are all a function of survivors by definition. And because of the pack or herd nature of survival, in other words, when you're surrounded with friends, you are better able to survive. When you have a feeling of belonging or inclusion, there's a greater level of safety. There is some research, as I recall, it's by, I'm sure he's a doctor, Matt Liebenberg, and he showed that on the whole, people are more concerned, or there's greater stress arising out of individuals who are excluded than there is from a fear of physical safety. And the way that I make sense of this, as crazy though it sounds, is if you think of the Titanic setting off on its voyage where it was going to hit an iceberg and sink with a lot of fatalities, I would rather be on the Titanic with my friends than left behind on the quayside because it was too dangerous, as crazy and as illogical that it seems. So the moment we are excluding somebody by our body language, by our tone, by ignoring them, by challenging them in a way that makes them feel threatened, we're triggering a basic survival brain. And that basic survival brain is going to go straight to the fight, flight, freeze, and appease mode, which is a very basic brain sense. And it is actually going to close down the prefrontal cortex, which is where our best innovation, our best problem solving, the executive problem solving comes from. So we are now being triggered. So the moment you put somebody into an exclusion zone, you are triggering a basic brain when you in actual fact you are wanting to include them so that you get their executive brain. And it's to do with the hormones that are secreted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can't really go into it in much more detail now, rather than say, if you're wanting trust and you're wanting people to feel, to bring their best thinking power, then the more inclusionary you are, the more likely you are to get that inclusion, and less time you are likely to spend in fight, flight, freeze, and appease mode as a team and trying to handle that downside. Have I answered that question?
Thank you very much. Let me move to another question. We have, there's a lot of information here. What would you recommend as a starting point?
So my recommendation as a starting point is always to start with something that you can do immediately yourself without having to rely on anybody else. So that is why I would always recommend start with your levels of listening and become aware of your level of listening and what is triggering you into, if you are in level 3, what is triggering you to get you down to level 2? It is likely to be something that is triggering a fight, flight, freeze, and appease mode. If you're level 2, what can you do to become curious to move yourself to level 3? Level 4 is ideal in most conversations which require innovation and an element of working together. In other words, not just a straight information exchange type. Level 3 is the minimum, and level 4 is ideal to really get that co-creation. I mean that creativity going. Levels of listening. All it is a matter of self-awareness. It's easy for you to do as an individual. It's not necessarily. It's easy to implement. It's not necessarily easy to do, but by focusing on it, you can move forward very quickly. And if you like it and it's working for you, then you can share it with your immediate team and you can help each other move to a higher level of listening. And most groups who do that within a relatively short space, and I'm talking days, if not weeks, find that they're starting to make significantly quicker decisions and better decisions. Because everybody's listening, you don't get those people who are coming in afterwards and suddenly saying, sorry, what was that? What was that? And having to go back and recap it, or working on underlying assumptions that are different. And then the second thing would be using that curiosity to ask questions for which you don't have an answer. Because if you have an answer in mind, you're probably not in genuine curiosity, and that is then going to be coming through, and if you have an answer, you're probably coming from level 2 listening. So starting point, I would go 9 times out of 10, go to levels of listening, and followed shortly by learn to ask questions for which you don't have the answer.
Thank you very much. And we have one last quick question. How long does this kind of process take?
Very difficult to answer that question, because it depends on where the team is as a starting point and where they want to get to as an ending point. So I would say that most teams with whom I work, to get realistic results, you can expect to see some shift. If everybody's committed and buys into the process, you can expect to get some shift within a couple of weeks. But most teams, to become fully effective and move themselves to the next level, you're looking at closer to 12 months with some kind of formal looking at their processes and review as to how they're doing and where they can improve. I would say at least once a month. So if you've got a team that is very dysfunctional, it can take months to just get the first breakthrough. If you've got a team that's fairly functional, you can move to the next level quite quickly, but then you may not get the full growth over that time.
All right, I just might have to take one last caller who's raised his hand. So we have Brother Ahmed Awad. Brother Ahmed Awad, could you please introduce yourself and unmute yourself also, because you have self-muted yourself.
Hello, Ahmed from Saudi Arabia. Thanks for the nice presentation. I enjoyed a lot, especially the different levels of listening. Hopefully, we could transfer to the real practice. I have just one question. What would you recommend, or let me say, tips for managing teams from different cultural backgrounds?
Okay, so sorry, I got to managing team from different backgrounds. Was there something else after that, Ahmed?
No, that's it. That's right.
Okay, so great question and so relevant. And towards the end of last year, I was introduced to a phrase which I hadn't heard before, but I just believe is going to increasingly become the way of the future. And that is the VIM team, Virtual, International, and Multicultural. And we have simple things which are obvious if you are used to dealing with them, but are not necessarily for everybody, like time zones. I'm an hour behind you guys today. When I'm not, for those of you who are on the GMT +3, I'm a GMT +2, but I'm working with another team where the majority of the team is sitting in North America. One individual is sitting in Italy, one individual is sitting in Chile. So we are dealing over 2 hemispheres, north and south, and both east and west. And it's caused some really quite interesting conversations where people are just not used to the fact that, you know, they're sitting in -44 degrees Celsius and I'm sitting in +35 Celsius, and vice versa. Okay. So it goes down to that building the foundation, to come back to your question, of acknowledging that there are differences, but that the differences are not necessarily bad. They just are, or good. They just are. And one of the exercises that, or one of the ways to look at it is, if you look at the ancient wisdom in terms of the three versions of the truth, which goes back, I mean, some people take it back to Socrates, and some before, some say it's always been that way. But there are three ways or there are three different versions of the truth in everything. There's the first, which is the individual view, which is my view. It's only my view, and nobody that I can say I'm right or wrong. I happen to prefer coffee to tea, but nobody can tell me that I'm wrong, okay, because that's what I prefer. If there are 5 of us in the room who all prefer coffee to tea, then we have 5 of us agree in terms of that, and that becomes the group view. The scientific view is now, if you do a random survey of, I don't know, 1,000 people, and it's globally representative, you might find that there's a 57% prefer tea with a standard deviation of X. And if somebody else goes and does the same survey, that would be the same. And those three versions, the individual true is sometimes referred to the beautiful or the art view. The group view is sometimes referred to as the good or the moral view. And then the third view is known as the science view or the truth. Okay, and it's replicable. So one of the challenges when we are, and opportunities when we are dealing with multicultures, is to acknowledge that we're different, but then move into level 3 listening and say, let's explore from a point of curiosity. What does this mean to you? I'm going to use the South African example because some of you may be aware, some of you not, but we have 11 official languages in South Africa, with the 12th one, which is sign language, being muted to be included, and we have multicultures, and some of them are bigger than others, obviously, some of them are quite small, but one of the really fascinating ones is the concept of eye contact. Let's call it the traditional Western view is often, it's polite to look at somebody straight in the eye, a firm handshake, and look someone straight in the eye. That means that the person is honest and respectful and can be trusted upon. Quite a few of the cultures in South Africa, it's a sign of great disrespect to look somebody in the eye if they are senior in the organization and or elder to you. It's a sign of disrespect, and you must keep your eyes averted. So by understanding the two different cultures, then you can now at least start to formulate how you will do it. And one of the transitions Ahmed is maybe to look at is, rather than treat people the way they want to be treated, rather than treat people the way you want to be treated, which is what a lot of people say is a sign of great respect, is to shift that and say, how would you like to be treated when you're dealing with somebody from a different culture? How do we approach each other? What is respectful in your culture, in your language? Because what you're trying to do then is to create that empathetic connection where you may not get it 100% right, but at least you are reaching out to acknowledge the validity of their culture. Hopefully that will also give them the courage and inspiration to reach out and understand your culture a little bit better. Okay, and in doing so, and then the rules of engagement are what kicks in, is to say, when we're working as a team, and you can do this between two individuals as well, because two individuals can form a team, is how are we going to deal with this? Okay, so wherever the sticking points are from the different cultures, so not to say yours is right and mine is wrong or vice versa, but for the process or the purpose of the existence of this particular team interaction, this is what we are going to call our good view, our group view. Okay, so going back to my eye contact, we might contract in that rules of engagement. You do whatever is culturally appropriate within your culture, with no offense intended or no offense intended to the other person or people, whatever that may be. Now, if I'm from the culture where we don't look each other in the eye, when I'm dealing with you, I don't look you in the eye. If you are dealing with me and you want to look me in the eye, you're welcome to do so, because I've committed not to take offense. I might be uncomfortable. It's not to take offense when you do so. And if you are seeing I'm uncomfortable, you at least know why. Does that help you?
Brother Hamid, you've self-muted yourself. You could just acknowledge, and if you have any supplementary questions, please let us know, or we just move forward then. You've raised your hand again, so not sure he's self-muted himself. So, well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. So thank you very much, Pete, for a very, very interesting presentation. Any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss up?
Just, I'll go back, I'll slow down to speed up. It is an enormously rewarding and satisfying experience to be in a well-functioning team that is really delivering extraordinary results. It's not easy in the short term, but the results by far outweigh the effort. And a little bit of effort up front pays huge dividends down the track, in my opinion.
Well, once again, thank you. Thank you very much. And I really want to thank you, Pete, on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, for taking the time to deliver this live webinar through our platform. So once again, thank you very much. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. And for your questions, please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs and to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.